Although I am not the biggest fan of video games in general, I really enjoy exploring video games from a storytelling perspective. Exploring how they are able to tell a story and develop characters through gameplay and through animation. I think we can all learn a thing or two about storytelling from many modern video games. In this video essay, I would like to talk about all the video games that I have played since I purchased my PlayStation 4, all the way back in November 2019. And I would like to start with a duology that literally changed my life. The Last of Us was the first video game I bought for my console. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where human civilization was ruined by Cordyceps pandemic. Cordyceps is a genus of fungi that can infect insects' bodies and brains. It is not dangerous for humans in real world, but in the Last of Us universe Cordyceps managed to evolve, so it started affecting humans, taking control of bodies and brains, practically turning humans into very dangerous monsters. The story of The Last of Us is honestly fairly simple. The main character is a bitter old man named Joe who lost his daughter Sarah when the pandemic just started and became a smuggler. He needs to deliver a 14-year-old girl named Ellie to the Fireflies, an organization that is looking for a vaccine against Cordyceps. Ellie is the key because she is the only known immune person for some reason. She cannot get infected. The Fireflies can produce a long-awaited cure from her. As Joe and Ellie travel across the ruins of a country that once was the United States of America, they get closer to each other. At the end, Ellie becomes like a daughter to Joe. Joe delivers Ellie to the Fireflies hospital in Salt Lake City, but he also learns that a surgery that can make a cure will be performed on Ellie's brain, which will undoubtedly kill Ellie. At the end, Joe, just like players, is left with an impossible choice. Leave Ellie to die or save her. Saving Ellie's life means to rob the human civilization of the opportunity to exist again, throwing off the shackles of nightmarish fungus. Joe already lost one daughter, so he cannot lose another daughter he found. Joe murders an entire hospital full of fireflies, soldiers and even doctors, and takes Ellie away to the town called Jackson where his brother Tommy lives. He doesn't tell Ellie the truth, but lies to her about what actually happened in the hospital. He says that there were dozens of immune people and the Fireflies didn't figure out how to create a vaccine. Ellie asks Joe to swear if everything he said was true. And Joe swears, even though everything he said was a lie. The last thing we see is Ellie's face. We understand that she doesn't really believe Joe by the expression on her face, but she accepts the lie because she has no idea what else to do and where else to go. And after that, the game just ends, leaving players in a bittersweet contemplation. The game might be simple story-wise like hundreds of other stories, but the ending leaves an incredibly powerful impression. It leaves players contemplating the moral aspect of Joe's decision to take Ellie from the hospital. He knew she would die, he didn't want her to die, but he also didn't ask Ellie what she wanted. What if she would have wanted to be sacrificed for the greater good, even if it was just a shadow of a chance, but chance nonetheless. Better than nothing, obviously. It was really hard to top this, and The Last of Us felt like a really great self-contained story, with an intentional ambiguous ending. As much as I love the first The Last of Us and the DLC left behind about Ellie and her friend Riley, but Part 2 absolutely blew my mind in almost every way imaginable. The game seriously challenges players' ability to empathize with the characters. Part 2 starts 4 years after the first game ends. Joel gets killed at the beginning by a girl named Abby who came after Joel in order to avenge her father Jerry Anderson, who was a surgeon from the first game. He was supposed to perform a brain surgery on Ellie, but he was violently murdered by Joel. The dark irony is that Joe didn't even have to kill Jerry, but he did nonetheless. After Joel's death, Ellie must go after Abby to Seattle, where Abby and her friends came from to Jackson. Half of the game we play is Ellie looking for Abby to take revenge, doing even more morally ambiguous things and slowly descending into darkness of revenge and pain. Another half of the game we play is Abby. Her story is not even about Ellie, she doesn't know about Ellie being in Seattle. We play as Joe's murderer. The game seriously challenges our humanity, our ability to see beyond simple white and black gradients. There are no good or bad guys in this story. Only people who desperately try to survive, and they do horrible things to survive, and save their loved ones. This is what the story is about. At the end of the game, Ellie is left completely drowned in misery and suffering. She lost everyone who was ever close to her because of her thirst for revenge that she couldn't quench. In ways, players are morally devastated. We have been through all the pain with both Ellie and Abby. The game literally forces us to do horrible things we don't wanna do. The ending is even more powerful than the ending of the first game. The technical aspect is also very important. The Last of Us Part 2 took motion capture technology, gameplay, animation to simply another level of quality unseen previously in the industry. The Last of Us duology is just so beautifully crafted it leaves players in contemplation for days or even for weeks. And each time you replay, you always manage to find something you have not seen before. The smallest details like journal entries or cards that add a lot to the lore and show how much dedication and hours of labor were put into the creation of both games. The Last of Us Part 2 is still my favorite video game, and it's been over 3 years since it was released. The second game I bought was God of War, the one released in 2018. It takes place in Scandinavia centuries after the end of God of War 3. I never played the original trilogy, so I went kinda blind into this one, not even knowing who Kratos was. The game is heavily story-centric. Kratos is trying to be a father for his son Atreus, but he just can't. He doesn't even treat Atreus like his son, more like an apprentice of some sort. He doesn't even call him son, just boy. At the end, Kratos finally calls Atreus his son for the first time, which shows how much Kratos changed after everything he and Atreus had to go through. Kratos-Atreus dynamic is similar to Joe-Ellie dynamic in some ways. The game just scratches the very surface of Scandinavian mythology, leaving a lot of room for continuation. God of War Ragnarok was released in November of 2022, but I still haven't finished it to be honest, so I can't say much about that game, except that Odin and Thor speak like gangsters from New York Mafia. But that probably was an intentional choice since Nordic gods, at least in the games, really do act like complete mobsters who run a criminal empire. The only thing that was too out of place is usage of modern slang. But to be fair, it's not like ancient Greeks could speak with a perfect 20th century British accent either. As for gameplay, this is where the game gets a bit boring to my taste. I love Naughty Dog games because you can choose your personal style of playing that suits you best. You can choose aggressive style, you can choose stealth, you can choose to kill all your enemies, or you can sneak past them without even killing them. Whatever makes your experience more pleasant. It is not always necessary to engage in active combat. The Last of Us games require a certain sense of creativity from players. Can't say the same about God of War games, they don't give players much choice. Furthermore, RPG is not really my favorite thing to be completely honest, because I often get really bored of constantly crafting and improving weapons and skills, or anything else that can be improved. Detroit Become Human is practically the opposite of that. It's an interactive drama set in a dystopian Detroit of 2038. In the game you can control 3 different android characters. Playing Detroit is like watching a high-budget sci-fi movie or a show. But you can also control the characters and make choices for them. All 3 characters are very different. Kara just wants to escape Detroit and find a safe place for her and for a little girl she takes care of. Marcus wants to start a revolution and Connor is a police officer. The game has pretty great detective elements and a lot of different endings. Like in majority of interactive video games, players' choices affect how the story goes. What characters say might be crucial to their survival. Horizon Zero Dawn is probably my favorite open world game, which I still have not even completed. I honestly like exploring the world of Horizon. It's set in several US states, but in the far future where advanced human civilization collapsed and went back to practically ancient times. The place is inhabited by robotic beasts who were made to resemble animals, both contemporary animals and extinct ones such as dinosaurs. The main character Aloy explores this unique world of the future while uncovering secrets of the Zero Dawn project and learning about a terrible catastrophe which happened hundreds of years before. Uncharted is another video game series by Naughty Dog, which has 5 games, the main series of 4 games about Nathan Drake, and one spin-off which I never played. The game mechanics and gameplay are very similar to The Last of Us in many ways, but also different in some ways too. The games are very similar in combat techniques and playing styles. You can either play aggressively or choose stealth instead and be extremely creative about passing each location. Uncharted has elements of a platformer which The Last of Us doesn't have. Uncharted also has puzzles that players must solve. Sometimes those puzzles can be very difficult. I once legit spent almost half an hour on one particular puzzle. In the third game it was a puzzle about stars. What both Uncharted and The Last of Us undoubtedly have in common is that they are heavily focused on the story, except the first Uncharted game. Especially Uncharted: A Thief's End, which was co-directed by the creator of The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann. I really enjoy these story-driven games much more compared to open-world games. Open-world games and RPGs always bore me at some point eventually. A Thief's End is probably my favorite part of Uncharted. The gameplay and animation are extremely good, plus Druckmann's influence on the way the story is structured is hard not to notice. All games are good except the first one. In each game Nathan Drake explores different parts of the world looking for ancient artifacts and hidden places. Like Indiana Jones but with less supernatural elements. Naughty Dog tends to make their games more grounded. Marvel's Spider-Man was an amazing experience. You can swing around New York City, you can see different places, indulge in simple scripted interactions with regular people. The game allows you to feel like you are Spider-Man yourself. The combat technique is extremely entertaining, as you can do a lot of things as Spider-Man. You can attack from any side and use your surroundings as a weapon too. The game even allows you to go stealthily, but I never preferred stealth since it's not The Last of Us, which tends to limit players' resources and forces players to be more creative. The boss fights are honestly some of the best in video games. It's just very fun to play this game. But perhaps the best open world video game ever is Red Dead Redemption 2. In this one you can literally do whatever the heck you want. You can let fucking loose and get completely savage. You can assault people, beat people up, shoot them, insult, strangle, shoot their horses. You can even go to jail for that. You can kill yourself pretty easily too. You can get your horse killed as well. It's very entertaining. There is also a very well written story inside this game and characters with very serious moral challenges. Not to mention graphics and attention to details. It's not on the level of The Last of Us Part 2, albeit very close, but because Red Dead Redemption is an open world game, so building an environment and writing realistic interactions with strangers was much harder than in a Naughty Dog's game which is linear. I am not a big fan of horror games because honestly they creep me out way too much. Horror games are definitely more intense than horror movies or shows. In movies we just watch the characters. But in video games we become characters. This is extremely unnerving. This is why I absolutely hate the Ground Zero section of The Last of Us Part 2. It's so freaking terrifying. But to be fair, Until Dawn is not really a scary game. It starts like the Saw movie, where there is an ominous maniac lurking around looking for the prey to catch. But the maniac turns out to be one of the main characters, playing a very cruel joke on his friends as an act of revenge. The real horror is so much worse than just an untamed psychopath. The game takes place in a lonely cabin on a mountain in Alberta, Canada. As the name suggests, the characters have to survive a horrifying night and live until the break of dawn. It is an interactive video game, much like Detroit Become Human. And like in Detroit, the choices that we make as players affect how the story goes, and which characters die, which characters survive. It is a very well written video game overall. The sections between chapters with a creepy psychiatrist are honestly brilliant addition. These were all the video games I have played since I acquired my PlayStation 4. Video games are not just fun but also a great way to explore storytelling, world building, character psychological issues, and so much more. See you again on this channel.